Welcome to Mom and Mind. This is a podcast all about perinatal mental health and wellness related to conception, pregnancy, birth, loss, postpartum, and new parenthood. But more than that, we aim to deepen our truths, shed light on real issues, speak about our pain, feel understood, and offer a path to healing. We raise the volume on these topics in hopes that someday everyone will have the support and information that they deserve before they need it. Please note this podcast is not a replacement for treatment by a professional or professional training. Hi everyone, welcome back to Mom and Mind. I'm your host, Dr. Kat. I'm coming on today to talk about self-care and expectations around healing and recovery in perinatal mental health. So first, I'm going to start off with a little exercise for us to do right now. What comes up for you when I say self-care is necessary? Notice what you're thinking about self-care. Notice what you feel in your body even. Are you totally cool with this idea? Is it something you do all the time? Or do you find yourself tensing up or rejecting this idea or rolling your eyes at me like, what's this lady talking about? Now, what comes up for you when I say that feeling better is going to take time? Is it, yeah, no, duh, lady? Or do you feel anxious that you have to wait? Do you want to be better yesterday? Or is it something else? So let's put those together then. That self-care is necessary for you to feel better. And it's going to take some time. First, I'll just say I've had a growing sort of irritation, I guess, with the words self-care, as they've sort of become a bit played out and people are associating self-care with doing things that cost money or take a lot of time, or that's for people who have a lot of time. But I'll also say that when you say self-care to people, it can also sort of elicit some strong reactions. And by that I mean it's sort of a loaded thing. It can feel heavy, like, oh my gosh, that's something else I have to do. Or you can have negative feelings associated with it depending on where you've heard about self-care from. Or you can even have feelings of guilt coming up with just the idea of self-care, like that's not something you're supposed to do. I think for the most part, people get the idea that self-care is needed. You know, we've all heard the sayings, you can't pour from an empty cup, or that you put your oxygen mask on first before you put one on your child. And I think what really bothers me about the whole concept of self-care is that we even have to have this conversation at all. I think what it is that it is upsetting that we have to talk about self-care and remind people that it's good and okay for them. We live in a world where most of us haven't grown up knowing that self-care is necessary, or even maybe we did self-care, but we didn't call it self-care and we weren't naming things the way that we name them now. But I think the fact that we have to have a conversation about self-care and help people to do that for themselves and understand what that is for themselves, I mean, that's a problem. It would be nice if it were just second nature, that we all just could engage in self-care without having to feel guilty. I also think I just want to rename self-care to something else, but I haven't figured out what that's going to be yet. But for now, here we are. Self-care is what it is. And it's important, and that's why I'm talking about it. So some of the dynamics that come up in psychotherapy, things that I hear from other people, specifically with mothers around self-care is, well, what is that even? What is self-care? What does that look like? How do I even do self-care? When would I be doing that? When do I have time to do that? Does it even help? This self-care thing, will it even help me? I feel selfish when I engage in self-care. And then also I hear, well, I'm doing the self-care, but I still feel the same. And then now I feel guilty too. Again, coming back to that guilt that we talk about so much because it's ever present. And I'll say self-care isn't everything. It's not. It is part of the healing that we need to get through most anything. And healing doesn't happen right away, unfortunately. As we've talked about before too, a lot of people who are suffering really want to feel better like last week. And that's very understandable. So engaging in things like self-care seems I don't know, it seems like not enough for a lot of people. And there's a whole other layer that we're talking about here, is that the expectations on self-care are really high, especially for people who aren't used to engaging in it. It's like, okay, fine, I'll do it. And now that I'm going to do it, it better work, and it better work quickly. And not that people are actually saying that to me or to themselves, but it's kind of the expectation. It's sort of the feeling that comes along with this self-care and with recovery and healing in general. And really, it's so hard to wait to feel better. But self-care is cumulative. It takes multiple efforts over time, and that can be really, really hard. It can feel like you don't even have the energy to think of what to do for yourself. So let's do that now. What does self-care look like for you? Really think about that. And in this list that you may be coming up with, I'm going to ask you to not include things that cost money. Although those things are very helpful, and we can have a whole other episode on things that cost money for self-care. Things like massage, psychotherapy, acupuncture, mani-pedi, those things are fantastic. And if they are on your list in some form, then great. That's great. But I kind of want to challenge us to think a little more deeply. What I'm talking about are the things that you do for yourself that might be totally unnoticeable to others. So here's a potential list. Eat breakfast. Sit and drink your coffee. Drink water. Ask for a hug. Notice your feelings. Accept your feelings. Reach out to a friend. Go on a walk. Tell yourself you're awesome. Sit in the sunlight. Take 3 deep breaths. Take a shower. Say no to something that you really don't want to do. Get out of the house and breathe fresh air. Then the icing on the cake is to acknowledge to yourself that you've done a bit of self-care. And here I could easily talk about how guilty people may feel about self-care, but I don't want to emphasize that today because I think this is really about seeing the benefits. The guilt is there, it is not useful, and it for sure does not make you feel better. So what's on your list? It might be really worth it to write yours down. And if you find that your list has 1 or 2 things on it, then maybe it's time to grow that list. And again, this doesn't need to take monumental effort. You don't need to take chunks of time out of your day. Sometimes these little tiny breaks that we give ourselves, like sitting in the sunlight for 2 minutes, helps us to slow down. If not, and again, it's not going to fix everything. When you're in a state where you have just the onslaught of feelings of anxiety, worry, sadness, frustration, irritability, you name it, your list of symptoms that comes up for you, when you can give yourself even just a minute break from it, it does something over time. And the more aware you can be about how often you're giving yourself those small little breaks, how often you're listening to your intuition about what you need. Maybe you do need a hug. And for some people, that can be really hard to ask for. But even acknowledging to yourself that you have a need can be revolutionary in the day-to-day, 24/7 care that you're doing with an infant or multiple children. What do you need? Is there some way that can be attended to? I'm going to say yes, there is. And the challenge here is that we have to make space for that. Certainly, we can ask for support from other people to help us make space for that. Like, hey, partner, I really need 5 minutes to myself. I really need 2 hours to myself. Whatever that is, just letting people know. But it's hard to even let people know when we don't ourselves know what we need. And sometimes just sitting in the sunlight can help us come to that. We need moments of quiet in order for us to be able to even hear our intuition and hear what we need. And maybe sometimes you just need to sit down and cry, and that's totally fine. Again, feeling your feelings and allowing yourself to have them and accepting them is part of self-care. And as you write your list, as you think through this, again, doing any one of these things won't necessarily recover you or heal you entirely. That getting out of the funk of this may take several approaches at once. And like we were alluding to before, there are some things that might cost money, like psychotherapy or a support group or taking medication or supplements. And I'll just also say that for everybody, sleep should be on this list. Self-care has to include sleep. In my mind, that's not negotiable. That you allow yourself to sleep is so important. And that might mean it's very, very hard for like highly anxious moms to do, but it might mean, putting your phone down at night, putting it across the room, so that, you're not up staring at it, scrolling through social media and starting to feel worse. That may be negotiating with somebody in your family or a friend or someone to come and give you a break so that you can sleep. Anyhow, sleep is crucial. But the power of investing in yourself in these ways is crucial too. It's a crucial part of feeling better. What I really hope comes through clearly in all of the Mom in Mind episodes, and including this one, is that you don't have to suffer, and that some of your relief can come from yourself, what you offer to yourself. There really is no benefit to ignoring yourself and your needs in the long run. And anyone who's been through anything difficult can tell you that the longer you go on pretending things are cool or telling yourself that it's not bad, the worse off you feel in the end. And, there are times where you need to tell yourself it's not that bad and, to get through. And that is one way of coping with things. But you kind of know if you're really suffering and you try and lie to yourself about it, you sort of know. But again, it's hard to drop into that intuition if there's no break in the onslaught of bad feelings. And self-care can provide that little bit of a break. I would just love for us to change the culture that surrounds how people, and especially new mothers and fathers, treat themselves and the roles that we take on to self-sacrifice and to be martyrs and to put everything and everyone else before ourselves. I don't know necessarily the science on this, that if studies have been done to show if that's actually effective. But if you sit and talk with somebody who is at their wit's end, who is having a really hard time, they're not going to say that, yeah, ignoring myself was fine, that it turned out just fine. It's really crucial. If I could extract the guilt from it, if I could extract this idea that it's selfish, that would be so awesome. But we have to do that together. We have to do that as a culture. We have to do that in our conversation. We have to do that with the way that we support each other, so that we, in our generation and this time here, can begin to change the conversation so that our children don't have to go through this too. Or maybe if they're going through it, it's a little less difficult. That they can grow up and know and have seen examples for themselves of women and mothers who have taken care of themselves and taking care of their children too. That would be super cool. So again, self-care and noticing what your own needs are really an important part of this healing process. And it is going to take some time. And for those of you out there who are feeling the suffering right now, those of us who have been through it and are on the other side and are feeling better can tell you that it does get better, but it does take, finding what your pieces are. And some of that is going to be self-care. And there may be other parts that you pull together that really work for you in a way that they might not work for somebody else. It doesn't need to look like anybody else's. Your healing looks like how you need it to look. And it might not look like your neighbors or the lady on Instagram. And that's fine. And that's totally okay. So I hope that those of you who are able to kind of engage in thinking through what your self-care options are, that you can highlight for yourself like, hey, either, yeah, I'm already doing these couple of things and these really work for me. Or, oops, how that many things on my list. Maybe it's okay for me to go on a walk a couple times a week. Maybe it's okay for me to, in the chaos of the morning when everyone's kind of getting out the door, it's okay for me to sit and eat breakfast for 5 minutes. Something like that. So here's to hoping that we can all treat ourselves better engage in the self-care that we deserve, allow our healing to happen in the time that it happens, and hold each other up while we're doing that. So thanks for being with us today. For this and all episodes of Mom and Mind, please go to momandmind.com, subscribe so that you have all of the episodes waiting for you for when you're ready to listen to them. Join us in our Facebook group, Mom and Mind Connection, or find us on Twitter and Instagram. Until next time. Thank you for joining us today. Our hope is that you leave here feeling heard, understood, and hopeful. Please share this podcast. Together we can support moms and families so that no one has to deal with this alone. Come and connect with us on Facebook and Instagram at Mom and Mind.